Okay. Welcome, Bruchim Abayim. We're continuing on Echot Shabbat, Shulchan Aruch, Siman Resh Nun Gimal, the Halachot of Shehiyah v'Chazara v'Atmana, and we're starting perhaps one of the most important parts of it, Seif Hey, Mutar latet al pi kterat chamin b'Shabbat tafshil shenitbashel me'erev Shabbat kol sulkom. If you have a pot already, imagine you have a pot, a lid, and you want to put something solid on top of it that has been fully cooked but it's cold, you want to warm it up on Shabbat, is it mutar or not? Says the Shulchan Aruch, yes. You could take a challah and put it on top of your cold challah and put it on top of a pot that's on the stove and warm it up that way. Tafshil shenit basher me'erev Shabbat kol sulko is fully cooked. Kegon pandish v'chayotze bazeh, it's like a knish. Lechameman, in order to warm them up. Lefi she'en derech bishul bekach, because it's not the way people cook, so therefore it doesn't look like you are cooking. In other words, we discussed in the Seifim before, Seif Bet, Seif Aleph even, and it came up again yesterday, that you cannot just do chazara, you can't just return something to the stovetop, even though that is fully cooked and there is not a prohibition of quote-unquote bishul involved with this, excuse me, but there is an issue of michzikim bashel. The onlooker will take a look at what you're doing, and it looks like you're cooking. You're putting a pot on top of the fire. Even though that's fully cooked, it still looks bad. Even if your oven, if your stovetop is garuf v'katum, still looks bad. Therefore, it will be asur. But if I could take care of this issue of michzikim bashel, then it will be fine. So what is a prime example of no issue of michzikim bashel is if you have a pot and you put a challah on top of it. That's not how anybody makes a challah. So it's clear that you're just warming this up, you're not cooking anything. Says Maran Shulchan Aruch, it is mutar. Now, the Berura Halacha, earlier on in Sif Gimel, he asks a stira in what Maran writes here versus what Maran writes in Siman Shin Yud Chet, Seif Chet. There, the Shulchan Aruch seems to say that it will be asur to do such a thing, even if you're putting it on a ktera rekanit, even if you put it on top of an empty pot, still will be asur. I could read to you the language of the Shulchan Aruch over there. I have a full Mishna Berura. It says over there in Siman Shin Yud Chet, Seif Chet, Maran writes, "La'aniach davar kar shenitbashel kol sorko." You have something cold that is fully cooked, al gabe mecham she'al ha'esh, on top of a urn, a pot that's being put on fire. Yesh omrim sh'tino k'manicho kineged hamadura. There are those who say it's not a problem because it's equivalent of putting something next to the tanur, next to the madura. V'chol davar she'al gabe ha'esh. Sorry, I skipped. V'chol davar shemutar la'anicho kineged hamadura v'kol she'ha'etz oledet bo kegon she'yavesh. Anything that you could put next to the fire, next to the fireplace, like something that's fully cooked and fully dry. Mutar la'anicho al gabe meham. You could also put on top of this urn, because not derech bishul. V'yesh omrim, and there are those who say, and again, Maran, when he brings yesh omrim v'yesh omrim, he's taking the second one more seriously. Yesh omrim da'avek maniach al gabe kira lechatchila ve'asur. Maran writes that those who say it's, as if you're putting it on top of the oven, and it will be asur. Afilu im nitpashel kol soko, even if it's fully cooked. Afilu im mistamek veralo, even if further cooking is not good for it, still will be asur. Even if you're just trying to keep its heat, lishmor chumo, and then Maran says rishon yirei ikar. Over here says Maran that even though that we usually take the second one more seriously, here ראשון נראה עיקר, ומכל מקום אם הוא תבשיל שיש בו רוטב, then it's going to be asur according to everyone. That's Maran there. So the Biur Halacha over here asks basically, what happened with over there? Right? So Chacham Obadiah answers this both in his Yechavedat and in Chazon Obadiah, that in Kederare Kanit, on top of the Mecham still, if you put it something tafshil, it looks more like, because the Mecham, it looks more like cooking. But over here, you're putting a little challah or a pandish on top of the Kederat Chamin. Certainly people do not cook like that. It's not the way people cook, and therefore it's mutar. Now, how about on top of a blech? Now, blech, the whole point of a blech is people don't cook like that. So Chavadia says on top of blech also is mutar. How about plata? So Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul, for instance, says, right? He says you could put it on a plata, but don't put it on the place that beneath it is the heating element. Which is a little hard to know where it is exactly. Sometimes you can tell because those places, become more lower. Whatever it is, the heat changes the color. Sometimes you can't know really. Like the better quality ones, you can't really know until you open it and see where the heating element is passing through. One of the corners perhaps is not on top of the heating elements. Chacham Obadiah disagrees with that. Chacham Obadiah says you could do it, no problem, because people do not cook on top of plata, so it's not derech bishul bekach, right? On the other hand, the back of the Mishna Berura Ish Masliach, the Talmidim of Rav Moshe Levi alav Shalom from Yeshivat Kisei Rahamim, they disagree with that assertion and say no, in Eretz Yisrael many people do cook on platas, so it is becoming derech bishul. So therefore you have to be more careful. So it really depends on how you slice that. If you want to put a challah on top of your blech, would be mutar to warm it up, and the plata would be that question that we just discussed over here. But if you have a plata and you have some food on it and you put it on top of that pan or that pot, then of course it would be mutar, even though that you're doing it on Shabbat without the requirements of chazara. Because again, on Shabbat, you could only return a pot to the heat source if you have the number of requirements that we mentioned before. That it has to be hot. You shouldn't have put it on the ground. Perhaps your mind was there. Maran does not hold of the mindset, need of the mindset there. But it has requirements. It's not just that you could put anything from anywhere there. But if you have something that's mamash not derech bishul bekach, then it becomes a little bit different. And here again, it will be one of those things. If you accomplish that something is not derech bishul, then you don't require all of the requirements of chazara. Now, into oven, that's a whole different story, right? For inside the oven, you can't cover inside the oven. So even if you let's call it, if you have a Shabbat mode oven that it takes care of all the things. Yeah, if you want to leave something from before Shabbat in there and then take it out on Shabbat, that's fine. If you have Shabbat mode that it turns off the digital readout and the fan and the thermostat and all those, the fancy technology has made it more difficult to be able to use the ovens, the old ovens. 85 years ago when I was growing up, that was much easier to use because there was nothing. You basically turned it on 300, 340, 400 right before Shabbat. You stuck the hot food inside and you turned it off minutes before Shabbat. You kept it like that and it was good to go. Nowadays you have light, you have digital readout, you have a fan, but if you have Shabbat mode, then you could take care of all of those, but that's good for taking out food. Sticking food inside, that is already a completely different story. On Shabbat, you cannot do that. On Yom Tov, it's a different story. But on Shabbat, because michzikim b'asher, you're sticking something inside the oven, that looks pretty much like you're cooking, and it is a place that people cook. So it's for sure derech b'shul bekach. So then, you'll have those problems on Shabbat. But be that as it may, says the Shulchan Aruch, this will be mutar. Now, the Mishna Berura writes, says the Mishna Berura, this that you could put the pandish, this like knish, whatever it is, on top of the pot that's on the oven, on the stovetop, even if it's mamash omed ala esh, still is mutar. Even if it's, from before Shabbat, standing on open fire, still is mutar. Why? Because not derech bishul bekach. Nobody cooks a pandish on top of the lid of a pot. So therefore, it will be mutar. Given the pandish is completely cooked and you're just warming it up, of course, right? It doesn't have an issue of michzikim bashel, of looking like you are cooking. And this that says kol sorko, that the pandish is fully cooked, says the Chafetz Chaim, you gotta know something. Da'at harashba, the davar shkvar nitbashel afiru im nistanen achar kach legamri, tulet be mishum bishul. Anything that was cooked, completely cooked, even though that it's now cooled down completely, reheating it is not a isura bishul at all. Afiru davar sheshborotev, even if it's liquid, if it has liquid in it. Shulchan Aruch later on in Siman Shin Yud Chet paskins against this Rashba. It's not only Rashba, the Rambam, many others hold like that as well. But Shulchan Aruch is going to paskin in Siman Shin Yud Chet in Seif Dalet that davar sheyesh porotev, davar lach, even though that was fully cooked before, a soup that was fully cooked, and now it's cooled down, less than yatzoledet bo, even if it's still warm, if you reheat it to over yatzoledet bo, you go to a very yatzoledet bo place, right? It's it's a safek isur. The Oraita Paskins like Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Satam lekaman besiman shin yud chet, he says the whole thing. Seif dalet kedat harosh, this is the Rosh's understanding in Rashi. He doesn't say it exactly, but it's really the Shita of Rabbeinu, Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah over there. Shesover davar sheyesh lo marak, im nistanen yesh bo achar kach od mishum bishul. That you have bishul achar bishul, a second cooking in davar lach, in something that has rotiv. So therefore, if you have a tea essence that you made from before Shabbat, you can't put it on top of your samovar or on top of the blech to warm it up. Chas v'shalom. Right? That's bishul achar bishul right there. Right? Can't warm up your soup on Shabbat. Or your gondi with soup in it on Shabbat morning. Cannot do that. Right? We'll get to halachot of amira la'akum, if you could tell a goy to do it. That's a separate issue. But says the Mishna Berura, the davar sheyesh lo marak, im nistanen yesh bo achar kach od mishum bishul, ve'hacha bepandish. And here is the interesting case. Pandish is a knish, right? The mekela Shulchan Aruch lechameman, afilu im yeh ayat zoledet bo, even though that it's going to become really piping hot, mishum deu davar she'en bo rotev, is because it doesn't have any rotev inside of it. Now, what is it? What is pandish? It's lechem memule bebasar. It's a meat knish. That's what it is. Urechule alma let bo mishum bishul. According to everybody, it doesn't have bishul, even if it was fully cooled down beforehand. Now, there is one issue over here that you have to pay attention, which we're going to see. How about if I have congealed fat inside this pandish? It's a fatty first cut of meat that I put inside there. So it's very fatty. And as I warm this up, you see little by little a whole trail of oil coming out of this liquid oil of meat, fat, that now it was warmed up, was congealed before, now it's warmed up, and it seeps through the puff pastry, whatever it is, the dough that you have, it comes out. So now that's liquid. Is that liquid? Or is that not liquid? So, well, it's the 4 places in Magen Avraham in Shulchan Aruch that's a stira. It seems like not so clear, right? So many Achronim understand that this depends. In other words, what is considered davar lach? What is considered davar yavesh? Ice, is that davar yavesh? Can I heat up ice? Of course not. It's solid right now. Yeah, but when it becomes liquid, it's liquid. So there's no inyan that you could put, like, cooked water that was now made to ice cube. I could reheat it on Shabbat. Chas v'shalom. Right? You can't do that. Of course you can't. Right? So why is that different than the congealed fat that was cooked and now it becomes all liquid? Right? The gravy also has a problem. So the simple answer would seem to be, it really depends on what is the natural state of that thing in room temperature, without tampering with the temper, right? If you have room temperature ice would be water. Room temperature fat would be solid. So therefore, that would be the possible heter for this pandish, even though that it has congealed fat in it, which is going to now loosen up and become liquid, still would be mutar. In that way, says the Mishna Berura, this that we say this is not derech bishul, to cook on top of a lid of a pot. Even though that on Shabbat you can't put something, you can't put something on the oven, on the stovetop. On Shabbat, even if that thing is fully cooked, vehu davar cham, and it's hot, you still can't put it because it's michzik mebashel. It looks like you're cooking. The act of putting something on stovetop or inside the oven, it looks like cooking, and so asur because of that. Hata mata mishum denireke mebashel. The reason is because it looks like cooking on Shabbat. The derech bishul bakach. It's the normal way to put something inside the oven, to put something on top of the stove. Aval hacha. But here, when somebody looks at you putting a challah on top of a lid of a pot, what is he gonna think? That you're cooking? No, it doesn't, because nobody cooks like that. It's what you're warming it up. Everyone knows that this is fully cooked. You're trying to warm it up or take the chill out of it. Nobody cooks on top of a lid of a kedera, and therefore any does not look like cooking. And now he speaks about what we discussed just a moment ago. If you have congealed fat, says the Chafetz Chaim, yesh lachmir mishum nolad. You have to be careful. Forget about cooking. But it's a problem of nolad, because you are transforming congealed fat into liquid, transforming something from one status of solid to liquid. It will be an issue of nolad, right? That's no, I'm saying if he has a lot, then it stands by itself. That's what he's talking about. Now, the reason he says that is because if it is absorbed inside the pandish, it's not a problem. If you have it in a pot, you have a lot of congealed fat on top of the gravy of your steak, and now you're warming that up, well, you have other problems with that. But even if it's fully, there's no gravy, it's just the congealed fat, that the Chafetz Chaim would say it's a problem, also because of Isur Nolad, right? But truth of the matter is, if you take a look at the very last Seif in Siman Shin Yud Chet, there Maran Shulchan talks about something called impanada. Impanada is the same thing as pandish. It's a meat knish. And there Maran clearly says that is mutar, even though that it seeps out, will be mutar, right? And it's not like melting ice or melting snow. It's different. There it's nolad in Siman Shin Chaf, as we spoke recently about this in our Smicha program, Shabbat, Sunday morning. But over here it's different because you're not doing anything beyadayim. Mimela, it's happening by itself. The Kaf HaChaim over here also brings this teretz, and it says it is mutar. In other words, over there in Siman Shin Yud Chet, Maran writes clearly that the fat that is congealed and now gets melted down, that is fine. There's no problem with it whatsoever. Mutar liten. I'm reading from Shcharuch over here in Shin Yud Chet. Mutar liten in panada. Keneged ha'esh makom shayat soledet bo. You could put it next to the fire. Afal pisha shuman shva nikrash chozer v'nimoach. Even though that the congealed fat gets liquefied and turns from one state to another state, it's not considered a problem, says the Shulchan Aruch. So that's pretty clear over here in Shulchan Aruch. We don't go necessarily with this thing. Now, Oretzion, Rabbi Shaul, is one of the many who says this teretz that we just said minutes ago, that if the room temperature status is solid, it is considered solid. The fact that it turns into liquid is not considered a problem. It's not, we don't deal with it like davar lach, which would have bishul achar bishul, and it will be the same thing with all the things that are solid in the room temperature status, and that is what the Chacham holds as well, that if you have, he brings this in the name of Nodab Yehuda in his Sefer Arshas Slach, that if you have, let's say, chema'ah, if you have butter, that the normal status of it is also solid. The fact that later on, if it gets warmed up, it becomes liquid, is still considered like davar yavesh. We deal with it as davar yavesh, and that would be its halachic status. Now, that basically it concludes our Maran. Now there's a long Rema that starts over here, which Bezrat Hashem we will continue, and we'll start the Rema in the days to come. Chazak Baruch.